Tonight, we're not here to fix anything, not to understand everything, not to become someone better before you're allowed to rest. This is a quiet space where we gently let go and return to inner peace through soft Zen stories inspired by the Buddha, shared slowly so your mind can soften and your body can rest. Maybe today asked a little too much from you. Too many thoughts, too many worries, too many small things you tried to hold together. And maybe, just for this moment, you're ready to set them down. Here, you don't need to improve yourself. You don't need to solve tomorrow. You are already enough simply by being here, breathing quietly. Just for a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here, sharing this quiet space. Let your breath slow as if it remembers the way home. Let your shoulders soften like they no longer need to carry the world. Tonight, we'll listen to a simple story. A story from ordinary life, carrying a small thread of Zen and Buddhist wisdom. Not to give you more to think about, but to help you loosen your grip. Because suffering rarely ends by force. It softens when we stop holding it so tightly. There's nothing to rush, nothing to achieve, only a gentle drifting into rest, into stillness. Whether you stay awake or slowly fall asleep, this moment is already enough. And now, we begin tonight's journey with these Zen stories. Fear doesn't always push you to run. Sometimes it convinces you to stay, to hold still, to call discomfort safety simply because it's familiar. It was early evening, the kind of time when the sky hasn't decided what it wants to be yet. A person sat alone in a small living room. Lights dimmed low, the TV on, but muted. Images moved across the screen without sound, faces talking, laughing, reacting to things that didn't reach the room. The air felt warm, too warm. At first they hadn't noticed it. The heater had been on earlier and the house tended to hold warmth longer than expected. But now sitting still, they could feel it pressing in. The kind of warmth that doesn't comfort. The kind that makes you restless without explaining why. They shifted on the couch and glanced toward the thermostat. The number was higher than they remembered setting it. They considered getting up to adjust it, then didn't. It's fine, they told themselves. I'll deal with it later. That phrase had been showing up a lot lately. Life had settled into a pattern that looked stable from the outside. Same routines, same conversations, same expectations. Nothing was technically wrong. And yet something underneath felt strained, like a structure being asked to hold more than it was built for. Fear had an opinion about this. Fear said, "Don't disrupt things." Fear said, "At least you know what this is." Fear said leaving would be worse. So they stayed, on the couch, in the routine, in the version of life that felt safe mostly because it hadn't collapsed yet. The room grew warmer. They noticed a faint smell, then not smoke, not exactly, just something stale. Heated air carrying the scent of old dust from the vents, ordinary, explainable. Still, it made their chest tighten. They muted the TV completely and listened. The house made its usual sounds, the low hum of the heater, the refrigerator clicking on pipes shifting faintly in the walls. All normal, and yet the body didn't relax. Fear often works this way. It points to familiarity and calls it protection, even when the conditions have quietly changed. They stood up at last and walked toward the window, pulling the curtain aside. Outside, the street looked calm. A neighbor walked a dog. Porch lights flicked on one by one. No alarms, no visible danger. Everything looked fine. Inside, the heat lingered. They thought about how many times they'd ignored discomfort because it didn't come with flashing lights or clear warnings. How often they'd told themselves that unease wasn't enough of a reason to move. You need a better excuse, fear would say. You need proof. You need certainty. They placed a hand against the wall. It felt warm. Warmer than it should have. That caught their attention. They followed the warmth down the hallway past closed doors toward the laundry room where the heater was housed. The hum grew louder as they approached, not alarming, just persistent. They opened the door. A wave of heat met them immediately. Not fire, not flames, just an enclosed space holding too much warmth for too long. The heater was working harder than it needed to, cycling without pause. It wasn't an emergency, but it wasn't nothing. They turned the dial down and opened a small window nearby. Cool air rushed in, sharp and relieving. The temperature began to shift almost immediately. Standing there, they felt something loosen inside their chest. Relief didn't come from fixing a crisis. It came from acknowledging reality. They realized then how close this felt to something else. How often they'd stayed in situations that were slowly draining them because nothing had caught fire yet. Jobs, roles, expectations, versions of themselves they kept alive long after they'd stopped being livable. Fear had convinced them that leaving required catastrophe. But what if it doesn't? What if recognizing the heat is enough? They stood in the laundry room for a moment longer, breathing in the cooler air. The house began to sound different as the heater quieted. Less strain, less urgency. They thought about how fear frames departure as failure, as quitting, as weakness. But sometimes staying is what burns you. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't enduring the heat. It's stepping out of it. They closed the door gently and returned to the living room. The space already felt more breathable. The couch no longer held the same weight. They sat down again, noticing how different it felt to be there by choice rather than obligation. Fear hadn't disappeared. It hovered nearby, uncertain now. Its argument weakened by the simple fact that nothing terrible had happened when they acted. The house wasn't ruined. The world hadn't ended. They were safer now than they had been before. And that mattered. They leaned back and exhaled, the warmth slowly receding. The thoughts settled quietly without drama. Some places feel safe only because you haven't left them yet. That doesn't mean they aren't burning you. The change in temperature was subtle at first. Not the kind you notice all at once, but the kind your body registers before your thoughts catch up. The air felt lighter, easier to pull in. The room no longer pressed back. They stayed seated, hands resting on their thighs, letting the house recalibrate around them. The heater cycled off. Silence filled the gap it left wide and unfamiliar. It wasn't empty. It was relieved. Fear didn't like that silence. It arrived quietly, trying a different approach. You overreacted. It wasn't that bad. You could have handled it longer. Fear is clever that way. When it can't stop you from moving, it tries to rewrite what just happened. It minimizes discomfort after the fact, as if endurance were the measure of wisdom. They noticed the thought without chasing it. The room told a different story. The walls felt neutral now. The couch no longer held that restless warmth. The body, which had been subtly tense for hours, softened without being instructed to do so. Bodies don't argue with relief. They recognize it immediately. They leaned back and closed their eyes for a moment. The TV screen continued flickering silently, light shifting across the room in slow patterns. A show continued without them. The world went on. They thought about how often they'd been taught to ignore signals like this, to push through discomfort, to call it discipline, to believe that leaving meant something had gone wrong. But nothing had gone wrong tonight. They hadn't failed. They hadn't caused a scene. They hadn't burned anything down. They had simply opened a window. That realization felt bigger than the room. So many situations in life don't collapse dramatically. They overheat quietly, slowly. The danger isn't sudden loss. It's prolonged exposure. Staying in places that ask too much for too long. Calling it stability because it hasn't exploded yet. Fear keeps people inside those spaces by offering a false choice: stay and suffer, or leave and regret it forever. But there's a third option fear rarely mentions. Adjust, step out, change the conditions. They stood up and walked through the house again, this time noticing details they'd ignored earlier. The way the hallway felt cooler now. The way their shoulders weren't drawn up around their ears. The way each breath landed more fully in the chest. None of that required courage in the dramatic sense. It required honesty. They paused by the open window in the laundry room. Cold air still streamed in, steady and unapologetic. Outside, the night smelled clean, distant, open. They rested a hand on the sill and stayed there. Fear hovered nearby, uncertain now without its usual authority. It couldn't argue with what the body already knew. It could only suggest going back, turning the dial up again, returning to what was familiar. But familiar isn't always safe. And safe isn't always kind. They closed the window part way, leaving it cracked just enough. Balance, not too cold, not too warm. The house didn't need extremes to be livable. That felt important too. They returned to the living room and turned the TV off completely. The sudden quiet was deeper now, more complete. The house had settled into itself. They sat again this time without the urge to escape their own skin. The space felt like somewhere they could stay for a while. Fear hadn't vanished. It probably wouldn't. but it had lost its strongest argument that staying was the only way to remain intact. Sometimes the most dangerous place is the one you keep calling home long after it stops being habitable. And sometimes the safest move isn't running towards something new. It's simply stepping out of what's been slowly burning you. They stayed there as the night deepened, breathing evenly, letting the house hold its new temperature. Nothing dramatic followed. No consequences arrived. No alarms sounded. Just a quieter room, a steadier body, and the understanding that safety isn't about endurance. It's about knowing when to leave the heat. She noticed the knot in the cord before she noticed her mood. It was a phone charger pulled out of her bag and dropped onto the kitchen counter without looking. When she reached for it again, the cord came up in a tight, ugly twist loops folded into each other, one end trapped somewhere in the middle. The kind of tangle that makes you sigh before you even touch it. Her first instinct was immediate. She tugged. The cord resisted, stiff and uncooperative. She pulled harder, the way she always did when something didn't move fast enough. The knot tightened. One loop cinched down on another, smaller, now more stubborn. She felt irritation rise in her chest, quick and familiar. Not because of the charger. The charger was just convenient. It had been building all day. Earlier, there had been a disagreement. Not loud, not dramatic, just tense. Words chosen carefully, but still sharp at the edges. The kind of exchange where nothing gets resolved, but everything gets heavier. She'd walked away telling herself it wasn't worth it. But her body hadn't agreed. Now, standing alone in the kitchen, she pulled the cord again. It tightened further, almost mocking her. She let out a short breath through her nose and felt her jaw set. There it was, the same force she'd wanted to use earlier. The same urge to push, to insist, to make something give, just because she needed it to. She stopped mid-pull, fingers still wrapped around the cord. The kitchen was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Evening light slanted through the window, catching dust in the air. Nothing else was demanding urgency. Just her and this small, ridiculous knot. She loosened her grip slightly and looked at it. Really looked. The cord wasn't broken. It wasn't defective. It was just folded the wrong way, pressed tight by impatience. She tried again, slower. Instead of pulling, she traced the cord with her fingers, following the path of one loop until she found where it crossed another. She eased it back a fraction of an inch. The knot shifted, but didn't open. Her shoulders dropped a little, not in relief, in adjustment. She'd always believed anger was useful because it was efficient. It got things done. It cut through hesitation. But standing there, she could feel how that same force applied at the wrong moment only made things worse. The cord was proof. So was the conversation from earlier. She thought about what she'd wanted in that moment. Clarity, respect, resolution. She'd gone in pulling hard, insisting on movement. And just like this knot, everything had tightened. She set the cord down on the counter and stepped back, rubbing her hands together as if to shake off static. The irritation didn't disappear, but it paused. When she picked the cord up again, she tried something different. She lifted the knot so gravity could help. She loosened one loop at a time gently, even when it felt inefficient, even when part of her wanted to hurry it along. The cord resisted less this way. One loop gave, then another. Her breath slowed without her telling it to. It struck her then how much of her anger came from wanting things to be over, wanting discomfort to end immediately, wanting the other person to understand right now, wanting the tension gone before she had to feel it fully. But knots don't respond to urgency. They respond to attention. She kept working at it, fingers patient now, not kind exactly, but precise. The knot loosened in stages. Each small success made the next one easier, not harder. She felt something similar happen inside her. The tight band around her chest eased a notch. The replay of the earlier conversation softened, not erased, just less sharp at the edges. The need to win faded into something more manageable, the desire to understand what had actually gone wrong. The cord finally fell straight in her hands. No drama, no snap, just a sudden lack of resistance. She stood there holding it, surprised by how satisfying that felt, not because she'd conquered it, but because she hadn't. She plugged her phone in and set it on the counter. The screen lit up briefly, then went dark again. The house stayed quiet. The anger from earlier hadn't vanished. It was still present, like heat left in a pan after you turn the stove off. But it no longer felt like something that needed to be yanked on. She leaned against the counter and thought about the conversation again. Not to rewrite it, just to see it as it was, a tangle of needs. Miscommunication, old habits pulling against each other. Maybe pulling harder wasn't going to help there either. She didn't know yet what she would say next time, or if there even needed to be a next time. Those decisions didn't feel urgent anymore. For now it was enough to know this force had never actually untangled anything in her life. It had only made the knots smaller and tighter. She picked up the cord once more, coiled it loosely, and set it where it wouldn't twist again so easily. Then she turned off the kitchen light and let the evening be what it was. She didn't feel calm after that, just clearer. The kind of clarity that doesn't come with relief, but with a quieter sense of direction. Like knowing which road not to take, even if you're not sure where the right one leads yet. Later that night, she sat on the edge of her bed with her phone in her hand. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp on the dresser. Outside, a car passed, and then the sound faded, leaving the street empty again. The day felt finished, but the tension from earlier still hovered, waiting to see what she would do with it. Her thumb hovered over the screen just like it had so many times before. There was a message she could send, a reply she'd already formed in her head. It wasn't cruel. It was firm, sharp in that controlled way that still carried heat. The kind of message that said, "I'm right, and now you'll understand why." She felt the same pull she'd felt with the charger, that urge to tug, to tighten the line and force a shape into place. She noticed it before acting on it. That didn't make the urge go away. It just stopped it from being invisible. She set the phone down beside her and rested her hands on her thighs. The memory of the cord came back not as a metaphor she analyzed, but as a sensation, the resistance, the tightening, the way force had backfired. She asked herself one simple question, without drama. If I pull here, does anything actually loosen? She already knew the answer. Anger, she was realizing, often comes from wanting a quick fix for a slow problem, wanting understanding on demand, wanting people to change in the moment you finally speak up, wanting the knot to disappear just because you're tired of looking at it. But some knots weren't made in one motion. They were made slowly over time, and they came undone the same way. She picked the phone back up and opened a blank note instead of the message thread. She wrote what she would have sent. Every word, every sharp edge. She didn't censor it. She let it spill out exactly as it wanted to. When she finished, she didn't feel lighter, but she felt steadier, like the pressure had moved out of her chest and into the page where it couldn't tighten anything further. She closed the note and didn't save it. The room felt quieter after that. Not peaceful, just less charged. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The anger shifted again, losing its urgency. It became information instead of a command. A signal saying, something here matters. Something needs attention, not necessarily right now. That distinction mattered more than she'd expected. Tomorrow she could choose a different approach. She could speak without yanking. She could name what bothered her without trying to force agreement. Or she could decide that some tangles weren't hers to work on at all. Those options hadn't existed earlier when everything felt tight. She turned off the lamp and let the room go dark. The phone stayed face down on the dresser. The charger lay neatly coiled nearby, loose enough that it wouldn't knot itself again overnight. Her body remembered that looseness as she settled under the covers. Her shoulders dropped into the mattress. Her breath evened out, not because she told it to, but because nothing was pulling at it anymore. The situation hadn't resolved. The relationship hadn't magically smoothed out. The knot wasn't gone, it was just no longer being yanked on. And for tonight, that was enough. She drifted toward sleep, knowing one thing clearly. Not every problem responds to force, and not every answer needs to be pulled out of the dark. Some things untangle when you stop fighting them and give them space to loosen on their own. He stepped out onto the small rooftop during his lunch break, the door closing softly behind him. The city was bright at this hour, washed in sunlight that flattened shadows and made everything feel exposed. He squinted slightly and leaned against the railing. Down below, traffic moved in steady lines. Horns sounded now and then, impatient but distant. The air smelled faintly of hot concrete and coffee from somewhere nearby. He liked coming up here when he needed a pause. Not because it was peaceful, it wasn't, but because no one expected anything from him for a few minutes. He checked his phone out of habit, then slipped it back into his pocket without opening anything. The screen felt louder than the world around him. Lately, he had been carrying a strange feeling through his days. A sense of being invisible even while surrounded by people. In meetings, he spoke when it was his turn. He did his work. He met deadlines. Still, it felt like something about him wasn't registering. Others seemed to move forward more easily. They were noticed, remembered. He told himself he shouldn't care about that. That wanting to be seen was shallow. But the feeling didn't go away just because he judged it. He tilted his head back and looked up at the sky. It was a solid, blinding blue. No clouds, no softness. Somewhere up there he knew stars were still burning. Even now, even at noon. He remembered learning that as a kid and being strangely unsettled by it. The idea that something so bright could exist and yet be completely hidden by light. Standing there now, it made sense in a different way. He thought about how often he mistook visibility for existence. How easily he assumed that if something wasn't noticed, it wasn't there. But the stars didn't stop shining just because no one could see them. They didn't dim themselves during the day. They didn't disappear. They waited. He felt his shoulders drop a little as that thought settled in. Maybe the parts of him that felt unseen weren't gone. Maybe they were simply not in the kind of light that revealed them. The wind brushed against his face, warm and dry. He closed his eyes for a moment and focused on his breathing. In, out. He didn't need to perform here. He didn't need to explain himself. The rooftop wasn't impressed by anyone. He opened his eyes again and looked back at the sky. The stars were still there, unbothered, unrushed. He stood there until his break was almost over, letting the idea sit quietly in the background of his thoughts. When he turned to go back inside, he felt less anxious than before. Not because anything had changed, but because he no longer felt erased by the brightness of the day. He went back to his desk and settled into the afternoon without the usual tightness in his chest. Emails came in, tasks lined up. The familiar rhythm returned, but something in him stayed softer. As the hours passed, he noticed how often he had been checking for signs of acknowledgement without realizing it. A nod, a comment, a reaction that said, "Yes, you matter here." That need didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. He remembered the stars again, how they didn't rush to be seen, how their existence didn't depend on the sky being dark enough to show them. They burned steadily regardless. Later, as he left the building and stepped into the bright street, the sunlight felt less harsh than it had earlier. Not because it had changed, but because he wasn't taking it personally anymore. He walked a few blocks before heading toward the train, letting the city move around him. People passed by, busy with their own thoughts, their own timelines. No one was looking at him. And for once, that didn't sting. He realized that he had been asking the wrong question. Not, am I being seen right now? But am I still here even when I'm not? The answer was quiet but clear. Yes. His worth didn't turn on and off with attention. It didn't fade under brighter lights. There were parts of him that lived in deeper layers, skills, values, kindnesses that didn't always show up on the surface. They were still active, still real. That evening, as the sky finally darkened and the first stars began to appear, he paused on the platform and looked up. There they were. Nothing about them had changed since noon, only the conditions. He felt a gentle reassurance settle in his body. He didn't need to force himself into visibility. He didn't need to compete with the daylight. Some things shine in their own time. and some truths are steady enough to wait. Some forms of pressure don't come from being trapped. They come from believing you are. That evening, the person stood in a narrow hallway of an apartment building facing a heavy door at the end. It wasn't an emergency door. Just an old one painted off-white with a metal handle worn smooth from years of use. The hallway light flickered faintly, giving everything a tired, late-day look. The person had been pacing for a while. Not back and forth exactly, more like circling the same few steps, starting again. The mind was busy running through possibilities that all seemed to end in the same place. I can't get out of this. There's no good option. I'm stuck here. The door had become part of that story, not because it was doing anything, but because it was there, solid, unmoving at the end of the hall. It looked final, closed, certain. The person walked toward it and stopped a step away. The handle reflected a dull glint of light. For some reason, the door felt heavier than it probably was. The thought arrived fully formed. I need to figure this out before I move. That thought had been around all day, maybe longer. The idea that clarity must come first. That understanding is the key that unlocks progress. The person rested a hand against the door. It felt cool, solid, real. Nothing happened. Overthinking often builds walls out of assumptions. Once the wall is there, the mind treats it as fact. The door becomes locked in the story, even if no one ever checked the handle. The person pressed slightly, then pulled the hand back, unsure why they hadn't just tried to open it yet. There was hesitation now. A quiet fear of discovering what would happen if the door didn't move. What if it really is locked? What if I'm wrong? What if there's no way through? The hallway was silent. Somewhere far away, a neighbor's TV murmured through a wall. Life continued, unconcerned with the standoff happening here. The person leaned against the wall and slid down until sitting on the floor. The door stayed where it was, neutral, uninterested. The thoughts grew louder in the stillness. They always did when there was nothing else to occupy the space. I should have decided earlier. I missed my chance. Now I have to stay here. The pressure in the chest felt familiar. That tight, compressed feeling that comes when the mind insists there is only one outcome, and it's already too late. The person looked again at the door from this lower angle. It didn't look different. Still closed. Still quiet. But something shifted, not in the situation, but in attention. What if the door isn't the problem? That thought didn't solve anything. It didn't open the door. But it loosened the grip just enough to create space around the idea of being trapped. The person stood up slowly, not with determination, more with curiosity. They reached for the handle fingers wrapping around the cool metal. There was a pause. The mind braced. The body tensed, expecting resistance. The handle turned easily. The door didn't fly open. It didn't make a dramatic sound. It just moved smoothly, quietly, like it had always been able to. The person stopped mid-motion, surprised. The opening revealed another hallway beyond, similar lighting, similar walls, nothing remarkable. just space. The door hadn't been locked at all. The person stood there for a moment, hand still on the handle, absorbing the feeling. Not relief exactly. More like disbelief mixed with something softer. All that time, all that pressure. And the door was never closed. The mind tried to respond, to turn this into a lesson, a conclusion, a warning. But before it could, another realization slipped in. The door hadn't changed. Only the assumption had. The person stepped through slowly, not rushing, not celebrating, just moving into the open space beyond, aware of how easily the body followed once the idea of being trapped dissolved. Behind them, the door stayed where it was, open now but unchanged in nature. It had never been an obstacle. It had just been part of the scenery. The person paused a few steps into the next hall, noticing how different the body felt. Lighter, less compressed. Not because everything was solved, but because one heavy belief had quietly fallen away. The thought returned gentler this time. Maybe some exits don't require effort. They require checking. And with that, the person continued on, leaving the door behind, not defeated, not triumphant, just no longer mistaken for a barrier. The next hallway felt no different from the first. Same worn carpet, same low hum from the lights overhead. And yet the person noticed how the body moved through it with less resistance. Steps felt easier, breathing deeper. The situation itself hadn't changed much. There were still decisions waiting, still uncertainty ahead. But something fundamental had shifted. The sense of being trapped had lost its grip. The person slowed near a corner and leaned briefly against the wall. The cool surface pressed gently through the jacket. The mind began to replay the earlier moment at the door, not with urgency but with a kind of quiet curiosity. How many times had something like this happened before? Moments when the mind assumed there was no way forward, when options felt exhausted before they were even tested, when the effort went into thinking rather than checking. Overthinking builds its own architecture. It creates barriers out of hesitation, fear, and imagined outcomes. Once built, those barriers feel solid, real, unavoidable. But many of them aren't locked. They're just untested. The person walked on, passing a stairwell. The door there was open, revealing a narrow set of concrete steps leading down. It was another path, not necessarily the one to take now, but visible, available. That felt important. Choice doesn't always arrive with clarity. Sometimes it arrives as access. The mind tried to grasp this, to organize it into a principle, but the person didn't linger there. The hallway continued, and the body followed. At the end, a window overlooked the street below. Evening had settled fully now. Cars passed. A bus hissed as it stopped and started again. Life was moving whether or not the person felt fully ready to join it. The window wasn't an exit, just a view. But it widened perspective again, offering a reminder that the world didn't shrink just because the mind did. The person rested a hand on the windowsill and looked down. The earlier pressure felt distant now. Not gone, but softened. The thoughts that had once insisted on immediate answers, were quieter, as if unsure of their authority. It wasn't that the door had solved everything. It hadn't. It had simply revealed that the sense of being stuck had been a misreading. That realization didn't demand action. It didn't require a new plan. It just changed the posture from which everything else would be approached. The person turned back and began walking again, this time, without scanning for exits or obstacles, just moving forward one step at a time. Overthinking often tells us we must understand everything before we move. But life rarely works that way. Movement itself clarifies. Contact reveals options that thought alone can't. The door from earlier was out of sight now, but its presence remained not as an image, but as a reference point. A reminder that not every closed-looking thing is closed. Not every pause is a dead end. The person reached the end of the hall and pushed through another door, this one leading outside. Cool air met the face immediately. The night was calm. Familiar sounds returned, traffic voices, a distant siren fading into the background. No resistance. No drama. The door closed behind them with a soft click. The person stood there for a moment, adjusting to the open space, noticing how easily the body adapted once the idea of confinement had dropped. Some doors don't need to be broken down. Some walls don't need to be climbed. Some exits only require the courage to check the handle. The person walked forward into the night, not certain of every next step, but no longer convinced that movement was impossible. And that was enough to keep going. Fear is often described as something to get rid of, something to calm, control, or lock away so it doesn't cause damage. But some fears don't quiet down when you try to restrain them. They push back harder. They kick, they pull. They exhaust you until you're too tired to stay balanced. It was late evening, the hour when the neighborhood softened. Porch lights were on, but not bright. The street was quiet enough that footsteps carried farther than usual. A person walked slowly along the sidewalk, jacket zipped halfway, hands tucked into pockets, more out of habit than cold. They hadn't planned to go for a walk. The idea came after pacing the living room one too many times, picking up a phone and setting it down again, feeling that restless pressure that doesn't point to any specific problem, just a need to move. Their breath was a little shallow at first, not panicked, just alert, as if the body was braced for something it couldn't name. Fear had been like that lately, not dramatic, not sharp. More like a constant pull on the reins, a sense that if they didn't stay vigilant, something would run off course. They passed houses that all looked similar in the low light. Lawns trimmed, cars parked neatly, windows glowing with other people's evenings. Ordinary scenes that somehow made their own inner tension stand out more clearly. Fear has a way of doing that. It makes normal life feel like something you're failing to keep up with. They tighten their grip on the phone in their pocket, thumb brushing the screen without taking it out. A familiar urge surfaced to check something. Messages, news, anything that might explain or justify this feeling. They resisted, not as a discipline, but because they already knew it wouldn't help. The sidewalk dipped slightly as it curved around a corner. A dog barked once, then went quiet. Leaves scraped along the pavement in a thin line pushed by a light breeze. The body started to settle into the rhythm of walking. Step, shift, step. The mind followed more slowly, still scanning, still tense. Fear spoke up as it tends to do when things get quiet. You should be more careful. You should be prepared. You don't know what's coming. It sounded reasonable. It always does. They thought about how much energy had gone into trying to control that voice. Deep breathing, distraction, positive thinking. Sometimes it worked for a while. Sometimes it didn't. Fear isn't impressed by force. It just digs in. They stopped briefly at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, even though there were no cars coming. The red hand glowed steadily. They stood still, weight shifting from one foot to the other. Across the street, a small park opened up, mostly dark. A single lamppost illuminated a patch of grass, the rest fading into shadow. They remembered something they'd once heard, a simple image that hadn't meant much at the time. A wild horse. Strong, fast, unpredictable. If you try to lock a wild horse in a small pen, it doesn't become calm. It becomes dangerous. It panics. It breaks itself trying to escape. But if you learn how to ride it, if you move with its energy instead of against it, something else becomes possible. The image stayed. They crossed the street and walked along the edge of the park, staying where the light still reached. Their pace picked up slightly, not rushed, just more decisive. The body responded immediately, breath-deepening arms swinging more freely. Fear shifted too. It didn't disappear. It changed texture, less tight, more like energy than threat. They noticed how the body didn't actually want fear gone. It wanted it directed, used, given somewhere to go. The thought surprised them. What if fear isn't the enemy? What if it's just untrained power? They walked faster for a block, then slowed again. Tested the pace. The feeling inside adjusted accordingly. When they moved, fear felt like momentum. When they stopped, it pooled and pressed. That was new information. They had been trying to suppress fear to quiet it completely. But maybe fear isn't meant to be silenced. Maybe it's meant to be guided. The park ended, giving way to another residential stretch. The streetlights here were spaced farther apart, leaving pockets of darkness between them. They didn't feel unsafe, just aware. Fear flared briefly in those darker gaps, then settled again when the next light appeared. They realized then how much fear depends on stillness without support. When there's no movement, no rhythm, the mind fills the space with imagined threats. Movement changes the conversation. They slowed their walk, letting the body find a comfortable pace again. The tension that had driven them out of the house had eased, not because it was conquered, but because it was being carried differently. Fear walked with them now, not dragging them. They reached the end of the block and paused, looking down a long stretch of road that disappeared into shadow. Fear stirred. They didn't turn back. They took a step forward, steady, unforced, letting the momentum continue. The wild horse was still there. But for the first time, it wasn't running away with them. They kept walking, letting the night set the pace instead of their thoughts. The street stretched out ahead, quiet and unremarkable. and that ordinariness felt grounding. No decisions needed to be made out here. No conclusions reached. Just forward motion. The fear was still present, but it had stopped pulling so hard. It moved more like a current, now noticeable, alive, but no longer knocking them off balance. The body adjusted to it naturally, the way you adjust when you learn how a bicycle leans into a turn. They noticed how often fear spikes when there's nowhere for it to go. When you're sitting still, staring at the same walls, replaying the same questions, fear builds pressure in closed spaces. Out here, it had room. They passed a driveway where a sprinkler clicked on spraying water in a slow arc. The sound was rhythmic, almost soothing. Mist caught the light briefly, then vanished. Another small reminder that movement doesn't have to be forceful to be effective. The thought returned clearer. Now a fear isn't asking to be erased. It's asking to be handled. They had spent so much time trying to calm themselves down, to convince their body there was nothing to worry about. But the body hadn't needed convincing. It had needed direction. Fear, like a wild horse, carries strength, alertness, speed. It notices things before logic does. But without guidance, it runs in circles, burning energy without going anywhere. As they walked, their breath synced more evenly with their steps. Inhale for 2, exhale for 3. Not as a technique, just something that happened. The nervous system settling into a pattern it recognized. They felt warmer now, not from exertion, but from circulation. The cold night air no longer felt sharp. It felt clean. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. A time when fear had actually helped them, kept them attentive, responsive, alive. A moment when quick instinct had prevented a mistake or guided them away from something that didn't feel right. Fear hadn't always been a problem. It had only become one when it took the reins completely. They slowed again, near another intersection, waiting for a car to pass before crossing. The headlights swept by, briefly illuminating everything, then disappeared. Darkness returned softer this time. They crossed without rushing. What had changed wasn't the environment. It was their relationship to the feeling moving through them. They weren't trying to outrun fear anymore. They weren't trying to trap it either. They were letting it move, letting it spend its energy in a way that didn't turn inward, that felt like trust, not blind trust in the future or in outcomes they couldn't control. Just trust in their ability to stay upright while things moved. They reached the edge of the neighborhood and turned back toward home. The idea of going inside no longer felt claustrophobic. It felt like a place to rest, not a place to pace. As they walked back, the fear continued to quiet, not disappearing, just settling into the background, like a horse finally matched to the rhythm of the rider. They realized then how often fear becomes overwhelming. Not because it's too strong, but because it's misunderstood. Treated as a threat instead of a signal. Fought instead of guided. You don't break a wild horse by force. You meet it. You move with it. You learn its language. The house came back into view, porch light glowing softly. Familiar. Steady. The walk had changed nothing externally. No problem solved. No plans made. and yet the body felt different. They stepped up onto the porch and paused before going inside, breathing in the cool air one last time. Fear was still there, quiet and alert, like an animal at rest. That was okay. They opened the door and went in the warmth of the house, meeting them gently. The urge to pace was gone. The need to check the phone had faded. Fear had been given something to do. And tonight, that was enough. The wild horse hadn't been tamed. It had been understood. And in that understanding, balance returned. It started as a sound, a thin, nervous buzzing that didn't match the quiet of the room. He was in the break room at work late enough that the building felt half asleep. Most of the overhead lights were off. Only the corner lights were on, leaving soft shadows in the hallways. The vending machine hummed. The refrigerator clicked on and off. Everything felt slow and ordinary until that buzzing cut through it. A bee had gotten inside. It wasn't dramatic. Just one bee circling near the ceiling light, bumping into the glass cover, like it couldn't figure out why the sky wouldn't open. It looped again and again, louder than something that small had any right to be. He watched it for a second, hand still on the door handle. His first thought was automatic: someone's gonna get stung. His second thought was also automatic: I should kill it. That was the reflex. Solve the problem fast. End the threat. Move on. He grabbed a folded paper towel from the counter and stepped closer, eyes tracking the bee's erratic path. The buzzing got louder as it dipped lower, then shot back up toward the light. He raised his hand, ready to swat, and then he paused. Not because he suddenly became a nature person, not because he had a moral issue with killing a bee. He paused because something in his chest tightened in a way that felt too familiar. He'd been carrying anger all day. Not the explosive kind, the contained kind. The kind that stays behind your ribs, warming up slowly, waiting for a place to land. Earlier, there had been an interaction, one of those moments that's small on paper, but heavy in the body. A coworker had said something dismissive, then smiled like it was nothing. A quick jab disguised as humor. It had landed on an old bruise. He hadn't reacted. Not outwardly. He'd kept his face neutral, finished what he needed to do, and walked away. But the anger followed him. It sat in his throat, waiting for another moment to come out. Now, in the break room, with a paper towel in his hand, he realized how easy it would be to use the bee as an outlet. One quick swat. One tiny victory, a harmless target. But it wouldn't be harmless. Not for the bee, and not really for him either. Because he knew this feeling, the feeling of wanting to smash something that's annoying you, even when it isn't the real problem. The feeling of wanting relief more than you want wisdom. The bee hit the light cover again, a soft tap. Buzz, tap, buzz. He lowered the paper towel slightly and looked around. A small window sat above the sink, cracked open just a bit. Not enough. He walked over and pushed it wider. The window groaned softly on its track. Cool air slipped in. The bee kept circling the light, still trapped in its own panic. He stood beneath it and waited. Not long, but long enough. At first, nothing changed. The bee didn't immediately notice the open window. It continued its frantic loop, drawn to the brightest spot in the room, the way it was designed to be. He could feel his impatience rise. This is taking too long. That impatience was familiar too. It was the same impatience he felt in arguments. The same urge to force a resolution. To make the other person understand now. To swat the problem instead of dealing with it properly. He picked up a magazine from the table and held it flat, not to hit the bee, but to guide it, creating a gentle barrier steering the bee's path away from the light and toward the darker side of the room where the open window waited. The bee dipped, then rose again confused. He moved the magazine slowly, making space, not pressure. For a moment the buzzing got louder, more frantic. He stayed steady. It took time. Not a lot, but enough to test him. Finally, the bee broke its loop. It drifted toward the window, hesitated near the opening like it wasn't sure it was real, then slipped out into the night. The buzzing vanished instantly. The room became what it had been before, quiet, dull, safe. He stood there with the magazine still in his hand, surprised by how satisfied he felt. Not because he'd won, because he hadn't added violence to a room that already held too much tension. He closed the window halfway again and leaned against the counter. The anger from earlier was still in him, but it had shifted. It no longer needed a target. It no longer felt like it had to hit something to be real. He realized then that a lot of his anger worked the same way as the bee. It got trapped under bright heat, under attention, under replay, under obsession, and it kept circling the same point until it exhausted him. Maybe he didn't need to swat it every time. Maybe he needed to open a way out. He didn't feel proud after the bee flew out. That would have felt too clean. What he felt instead was a kind of quiet steadiness, the kind that comes when you don't make things worse. He threw the paper towel into the trash and rinsed his hands at the sink. The water ran cool, then warmed. He let it run a second longer than necessary, watching it slip over his fingers and disappear down the drain. The break room stayed still. The vending machine hummed on. The refrigerator clicked. No one came in to comment on what had just happened. The moment passed without witnesses, and that felt right. He leaned against the counter and noticed that the tight band in his chest had loosened. Not all the way. Just enough that his breath didn't feel trapped anymore. The anger from earlier was still there, but it no longer felt like it needed an outlet. On his drive home, the image of the bee returned not as a symbol he was trying to decode, but as a simple memory. The frantic looping, the way it kept hitting the light, the way it hadn't needed punishment. It had needed an exit. Traffic was light. Street lights passed in steady intervals. His hands rested easily on the steering wheel. He thought again about the co-worker, the comment, the smile that had followed like it was all a joke. He felt the familiar spark flare, but it didn't catch this time. There was space around it now. He didn't rehearse a confrontation. He didn't draft a message in his head. He just noticed the anger as it rose and let it move through without gripping it. At home, he kicked off his shoes and dropped his keys into the bowl by the door. The apartment greeted him with the quiet he'd been craving all day. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't reach for his phone. He stood by the window for a moment, looking out at the dark street. A porch light glowed across the way. A cat crossed the sidewalk and disappeared under a parked car. The world didn't seem interested in his frustration, and that helped. He realized then how often he treated anger like a problem that had to be crushed or expressed immediately, like something dangerous that couldn't be allowed to linger. But anger wasn't a bomb. It was more like that be uncomfortable, disruptive, loud, but not evil. It didn't need to be destroyed. It needed direction. That didn't mean letting people walk all over him. It didn't mean staying silent forever. It just meant choosing when and how to respond instead of letting the heat decide for him. He poured himself a glass of water and drank it slowly. The coolness settled him further. The night felt wide, unhurried. Tomorrow he might speak up. Or he might decide that the comment wasn't worth his energy after all. Either way, he would be choosing from a clearer place, not from the buzz of a trapped moment. He turned off the last light and let the room darken. The anger hadn't disappeared, but it had found an open window. And without being fed, it drifted out on its own. She didn't mean to drop the bowl. It slipped from her hands while she was drying it, the towel catching on the edge just enough to twist it out of her grip. It hit the floor with a sharp sound louder than she expected. Then silence. She stood still for a second, heart beating faster than it needed to. The bowl lay in pieces at her feet, clean breaks running through the ceramic like thin lines drawn on purpose. She exhaled slowly and crouched down. Some of the pieces were large, some were small, almost dust-like at the edges. Nothing was completely shattered, but there was no pretending it was fine. She gathered the pieces carefully, placing them on the table one by one. The room was quiet except for the soft scrape of ceramic against wood. She had always hated breaking things, not because of the mess, but because of what it made her feel careless, clumsy, like she should have known better. That feeling was familiar. It showed up in other places too, when she said the wrong thing, when she trusted too quickly, when something in her life cracked instead of holding together. She sat down and looked at the pieces spread out in front of her. The bowl had been one of her favorites. Not expensive, just comfortable. The kind of object that fit easily into her hands, like it had learned their shape over time. She remembered hearing once about Kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Not hiding the cracks, not smoothing them away, highlighting them. At the time, she had thought it sounded poetic, but impractical. Something nice to look at in a book, not something you actually did. Now, with the broken bowl in front of her, the idea returned differently. She picked up one piece and traced the edge of the break with her finger. It was sharp, but precise. Clean. The break wasn't random. It followed a line that had always been there, hidden in the structure, waiting for the right moment to show itself. That thought stayed with her. How many of her own cracks had formed the same way? Not suddenly, but quietly over time under pressure. She thought about the moments she usually tried to hide, the ones she replayed late at night and wished she could edit out of her story. She had learned to move past them quickly, to patch things up in a way that made them less visible, to act like nothing had happened. But the bowl on the table refused that option. It couldn't go back to being what it was. She could throw it away. That would be easier. She could replace it with something new, something unbroken, something that didn't carry a history. She sat with those options for a while. Then she imagined the gold-filled cracks of Kintsugi, the way the lines didn't apologize for themselves, the way the object became something else still useful, but also marked. She didn't reach for glue yet. Instead, she stayed there breathing, letting the discomfort settle without trying to rush past it. The bowl was broken, and for once, she didn't feel the urge to hide that fact. She cleaned the table and laid the pieces out again slower this time, as if the pace itself mattered. There was no rush to fix anything yet. She studied the breaks, carefully noticing how they fit together, how each line had a logic of its own. Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. As she worked, she thought about how quickly she usually tried to move on from things that hurt. How often she rushed to become functional again before she had actually understood what had broken. This felt different. Here, repair required attention, patience, a willingness to look closely at the damage without turning away. She imagined the gold tracing each crack, not covering it, but following it exactly as it was, turning the fracture into something intentional. It made her think of her own scars, the moments she had learned to call mistakes, the times she wished she had been stronger, quieter, less affected. What if those moments weren't meant to disappear? What if they were meant to be acknowledged, outlined gently, held with care? She realized that healing didn't always mean returning to the original shape. Sometimes it meant allowing a new one to form. The bowl, once repaired, would never look the same, but it would carry its history openly, without apology. She liked that idea, not because it made pain beautiful, but because it made honesty possible. When she finally stood up, the pieces remained on the table, still separate. The work wasn't finished, and that was fine. Some things didn't need to be rushed into wholeness. As the room grew quieter, she felt a familiar softness settle in her chest. Not sadness, not relief, acceptance. She turned off the light and left the bowl where it was broken but seen. And for the first time, she understood that her own healing might look the same, unfinished, visible, and still worthy of care. Some thoughts don't need answers. They need permission to fall. That afternoon, the person was walking through a small park near home. Not a destination walk, just a loop around familiar paths, the kind taken without expectation. The air carried the quiet chill of late autumn, cool, but not sharp. Leaves had gathered everywhere along the edges of the path, beneath benches around the bases of trees. The person walked slowly, hands in pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the breeze. The day had been full of thinking, not urgent thinking, persistent thinking, the kind that circles without landing. Did I handle that right? What if I misunderstood something? Why does this keep coming back? Each thought felt light on its own, but together they weighed down the mind, like holding too many small things at once. A leaf skittered across the path, pushed by a brief gust of wind. It spun once, then settled near the curb. The person noticed it without stopping, without assigning meaning. Just a leaf moving where the air carried it. The thoughts continued anyway. Overthinking often comes from holding on longer than necessary, replaying moments that have already passed, carrying conversations that are no longer happening. The mind keeps them close, as if holding them will prevent loss. The person slowed near a cluster of trees and stopped beside a bench. The bench was empty, its wooden slats dusted with fallen leaves in shades of brown and gold. Some were curled and dry, others still held a trace of color. The person brushed a few leaves aside and sat down. The bench creaked softly under the shift of weight. The mind tried to follow its usual rhythm, bringing the same thoughts forward again. But something about the stillness made the repetition feel more obvious, like watching the same scene loop without progress. The person leaned forward slightly and picked up a leaf resting near their shoe. It was fragile now, edges thin and brittle. When turned over, the veins were clearly visible, branching outward from the center. This leaf had once been green. It had once been part of something alive and growing. Now, it had let go. Not in a dramatic way, not as a decision, just as a natural response to time. The person rolled the leaf gently between two fingers. It crumbled a little, leaving faint dust behind. No resistance, no effort. There was a quiet contrast between that and the mind's behavior. The mind wanted to keep everything intact, preserve every detail, maintain the exact shape of thoughts long after their purpose had passed, as if letting go meant something important would be lost forever. The person released the leaf and watched it fall back onto the bench, joining the others. It didn't stand out. It didn't disappear. It simply returned to where it belonged. The wind moved through the trees again. More leaves loosened and drifted down, landing without sound. The ground didn't try to catch them. The branches didn't hold them back. The person leaned back against the bench and let the shoulders drop. A breath came and went, without direction. The thoughts still appeared, but they didn't feel as solid. One thought surfaced clearly: maybe I don't need to carry this right now. It wasn't a conclusion, just a possibility. The person watched another leaf fall, this one slower, turning gently as it descended. It didn't rush. It didn't hesitate. It moved as it was meant to. Overthinking often adds urgency where none exists. It convinces the mind that now is the only moment to solve, to decide to fix. But the park offered a different pace. Everything here moved according to its own timing. The person sat there longer than planned, watching leaves gather where they would, unbothered by order or arrangement. The ground accepted them without question. A few thoughts tried to cling, unfinished ideas, imagined futures. But they felt less convincing here, less worthy of being held so tightly. The person stood up slowly and brushed the bench clean again, though there was no real need. The leaves returned almost immediately, drifting back as the wind shifted. That small futility was oddly comforting. You can clear space, but you don't have to control what falls. The person stepped back onto the path and continued walking. Leaves crunched softly underfoot, breaking apart with each step. They didn't protest. They didn't linger. The mind noticed this too. Some thoughts are meant to fall away on their own. Not pushed, not solved. Just allowed to return to the ground. And as the person walked on, that idea stayed not as something to remember, but as something already happening. The path curved gently ahead, disappearing behind a line of trees. The person followed it without thinking much about where it led. Shoes moved through dry leaves, each step producing a soft, uneven sound. Some leaves cracked, others folded quietly into the ground. The mind noticed the sound, then let it go. A little farther along the path widened into a small clearing. Sunlight filtered through the branches in thin lines, catching dust in the air. Leaves lay everywhere on the ground, on the low stone wall nearby, gathered in shallow piles where the wind had paused. The person stopped again, resting a hand on the cool stone. The surface felt steady. Unconcerned with what landed on it, overthinking often feels like an attempt to keep things from falling apart. The mind holds onto ideas, memories, plans, worried that if they're released, something essential will be lost. But here, nothing seemed to be missing. The trees weren't bare because they had failed. They were bare because it was time. The person watched as another leaf detached and drifted down, slow and uneven. It didn't fall straight. It wandered, changed direction, then finally settled near the base of the tree. No effort, no resistance. The mind offered a thought. What if I just let this pass? It wasn't a command. It didn't ask for discipline. It was closer to curiosity than intention. Some worries returned lightly. A moment from earlier in the week, a question that hadn't been answered yet. They appeared, hovered, then faded like leaves brushing past without landing. The person noticed how different this felt from trying to push thoughts away. Nothing was being rejected. Nothing was being solved. The thoughts were simply no longer being held. A breeze moved through the clearing, lifting several leaves at once. They skidded across the ground, then dropped again. The wind didn't choose which ones to move. It didn't aim. It just passed through. The person realized how often the mind behaves differently, selecting certain thoughts, gripping them tightly, replaying them until they feel heavier than they are. As if attention alone could make them permanent, but attention can also be released. The person sat down on the low stone wall and let the feet rest on the ground. The body felt settled now, not because everything was resolved, but because nothing was being carried unnecessarily. The mind grew quieter in the background, not empty, just less crowded. Thoughts still passed through, but they didn't demand a response. They didn't line up to be examined. There was a subtle relief in that. Not relief from answers, relief from effort. The clearing remained unchanged. Leaves continued to fall one by one without announcement. The ground accepted them without comment. The person stood up again and brushed a few leaves from their jacket. Some fell back immediately. Others clung for a second longer before dropping. That felt familiar too. Some thoughts fall right away. Others take a little time. Neither needs to be forced. As the person walked toward the edge of the park, the sounds of the neighborhood returned, cars in the distance, a door closing somewhere, A faint voice carried by the air. Ordinary life waited just beyond the trees. The person didn't feel lighter in a dramatic way. There was no sense of breakthrough, just a quiet reduction in pressure, less holding, less arranging. The worries from earlier would probably come back later, in different forms, on different days. That was part of being human. But now, there was an understanding that didn't need to be remembered actively. Thoughts don't need to be cleared for peace to appear. They only need to stop being collected. Leaves don't fall because the tree forces them to. They fall because the season changes. The person stepped out of the park and onto the sidewalk carrying nothing extra, letting the rest return to the ground behind them. And that was enough. Fear can feel solid, heavy, unmovable. The kind of thing you bump into again and again no matter which way you turn. It convinces you that this is how things are now, fixed, frozen in place. It was late at night, the house quiet in that way that makes small sounds feel louder than they are. A person stood in the bathroom with the light dimmed low steam already beginning to gather along the edges of the mirror. The shower had been running for a minute, filling the room with a soft, steady rush. They hadn't planned to shower. The thought came from a simple need to interrupt the night, to step out of the mental loop that had been tightening for hours. Their shoulders felt stiff, jaw tight, a familiar tension that hadn't announced itself but had settled in all the same. Fear had been sitting there all evening, not sharp, not panicked, more like a block of ice pressed against the chest, cold, dense, hard to ignore. The kind of fear that doesn't race, the kind that tells you nothing will change. They stepped into the shower and pulled the curtain closed. Warm water hit their shoulders, spreading quickly, sending a brief shiver through the body before settling into something more comfortable. Steam rose, blurring the edges of the room. They tilted their head back and let the water run over their neck. Muscles responded immediately, loosening a fraction without being asked. The mind, however, stayed tight. The same thoughts replayed themselves, familiar and convincing. What if this feeling never lifts? What if this is just who you are now? Someone who worries, someone who holds tension like a second skeleton. Fear likes permanence. It speaks in absolutes. They reached for the soap hands, moving automatically, lather forming and rinsing away. Ordinary actions. No meaning attached, just sequence. As the warmth continued, they noticed something subtle. The fear didn't vanish, but it changed texture. It felt less sharp around the edges, less rigid, like ice exposed to heat. They'd been treating fear like something to shatter, to break apart through logic or reassurance. But ice doesn't respond to force. Hitting it only makes it harder, colder, more dangerous. Ice responds to warmth. The thought landed gently without instruction. They pressed their palms against the tiled wall, feeling the heat seep into their skin. Breath slowed naturally, not deep, just easier. Fear shifted again, still there, still noticeable, but no longer immovable. They realized how rarely they'd approached fear this way, not with arguments, not with strategies, just with attention that wasn't hostile. Awareness has a temperature. Cold awareness judges. Warm awareness notices. The water ran steadily, indifferent to their thoughts. It didn't rush. It didn't pause. It simply kept moving, heat meeting skin, steam filling space. They thought about how often fear had tightened when they stared at it directly, demanding answers, and how differently it felt now when they simply let it exist alongside warmth. Fear hadn't needed to be solved. It needed to be felt safely. They rested their forehead briefly against the wall, eyes closed, letting the sound of the water replace the noise in their head. The bathroom disappeared into soft blur. No edges, no sharp lines. The block of ice in their chest began to feel less like a block and more like a shape that could change. Not gone, just softening. They stayed there longer than necessary, not timing it, not monitoring progress. The body didn't need a schedule for this. Outside the shower, the house remained still. The night went on unconcerned with their inner weather. Inside, the steam fear continued to melt, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to remind them that nothing solid stays that way forever. Ice melts. Tension yields. Even the most rigid fear responds to warmth. They turned slightly, letting the water hit their back now, and felt another small release travel down their spine. A quiet signal from the body. This is working without effort. The fear that had felt frozen earlier now felt more like cold water, still uncomfortable, but moving, flowing, temporary. They breathed out slow and unforced. The night didn't need to be fixed tonight. Fear didn't need to disappear. It just needed to thaw. They stayed under the water as long as it felt natural, not counting minutes, not waiting for a signal that said, "Now you're done." The body has its own timing. When it's listened to, it usually lets you know. The steam thickened, softening everything. The mirror was completely fogged now. No reflection left to examine. That too felt like a relief. No need to see themselves. No need to check how they looked or whether anything had changed. Fear doesn't need an audience to soften. It needs permission. They reached up and turned the water slightly warmer. Just a small adjustment. The heat spread evenly. Not intense, just consistent. Their shoulders dropped another notch. Jaw unclenched. Breath found a slower rhythm without instruction. The fear was still present, but it no longer felt like a solid mass. It had become something closer to sensation, coolness here, tightness there, rather than a single overwhelming thing. That difference mattered. Fear becomes unbearable when it's treated as an object. This fear, this problem, this thing I have to get rid of. When it's broken into sensations, it becomes workable, human-sized. They noticed the water tracing paths down their arms, collecting briefly at the elbows before falling away. Nothing stayed. Everything moved on. Change didn't require effort. It required conditions. They thought about how often they'd tried to force themselves out of fear, talk themselves up, calm themselves down, tell themselves they were being irrational. None of that had worked for long. Warmth was working. Not warmth as comfort alone, but warmth as attention without judgment. Staying present long enough for the body to realize it wasn't under attack. The water continued its steady sound, filling the room with something neutral and reliable. The nervous system leaned into that reliability, letting go of its watchfulness bit by bit. Fear shifted again, growing quieter, not because it had been dismissed, but because it had been received. They turned the water off eventually. The sudden quiet was noticeable, but not jarring. Droplets continued to fall from the curtain and tiles, little echoes of movement. They reached for a towel and wrapped it around themselves. The fabric warm and heavy from the steam. Another layer of heat. Another signal of safety. As they stepped out onto the bath mat, they felt the difference clearly now. Not perfect calm, not happiness, just space around the fear. They wiped a small circle in the fogged mirror with their hand. Their reflection appeared briefly soft-edged, unremarkable, familiar. They didn't linger. They let the steam close in again. Fear had lost its claim of permanence. It might come back later. Tomorrow, in another form. That was okay. It no longer felt like a verdict. Just a state that could change under the right conditions. They moved through the house slowly, towels still around their shoulders, lights dim. The night felt quieter now, less demanding. The same problems existed. The same uncertainties waited. But the ice had melted enough to remind them of something important. Nothing inside stays frozen forever. Awareness brings warmth. Warmth brings movement. They climbed into bed and pulled the blanket up, feeling its weight settle over them. The body welcomed it, sinking into the mattress, no longer braced. Fear was still there, faint and distant, like cold air outside a closed window. Noticeable, but no longer invading the room. They closed their eyes. Tonight didn't require courage or answers or breakthroughs. It required exactly what they'd given it: presence, warmth, and time. The rest could wait. Ice melts when it's allowed to, and so does fear. It didn't hurt at first. That was the problem. They were halfway down the block before they noticed it, a small sharp pressure under the ball of the foot, not enough to stop walking, just enough to be annoying. The kind of discomfort you assume will disappear if you keep moving. They kept walking. Streetlights cast pale circles on the sidewalk. A late bus sighed past on the main road. The night had that ordinary, unfinished feeling, quiet, but not asleep yet. They had gone out for a short walk to cool off after a long day. Nothing more. No destination. No plan. The pressure grew with each step. Still manageable. Still ignorable. But it changed their stride just enough to throw everything else off. Their shoulders tightened, their jaws set. They felt irritation rise out of proportion to something so small. Earlier there had been an argument, not loud, not explosive, just persistent. The kind that doesn't end with slammed doors, but with 1,000 unfinished sentences hanging in the air. They had walked away, telling themselves it wasn't worth it, telling themselves to drop it. Now the stone in the shoe seemed to take on extra meaning. Every step landed on it again, and again, and again. They told themselves to keep going. I'll deal with it later. That thought felt familiar. They reached the corner and turned, the pressure now unmistakable. A tiny rock, probably wedged just right to cause maximum irritation without actually injuring anything. Their pace slowed. Their breathing shortened. Anger has a way of hitching a ride on physical discomfort. The body starts reacting before the mind catches up. By the time they stopped under a streetlight, they were more upset than the situation deserved. They bent down, lifted one foot, and shook it once. Nothing happened. The stone stayed put. They sighed sharper than they meant to and leaned against a metal signpost. The light buzzed faintly overhead. The sidewalk was empty. For a moment they considered just pushing through. It's not that bad. That thought felt familiar too. Instead, they sat down on the curb. The concrete was cool through their clothes. They unlaced the shoe slowly, fingers moving with less urgency now that they'd stopped. When they tipped it upside down, a small pebble fell into their palm. Smooth, gray, ordinary. They stared at it longer than necessary. So much irritation for something this small. They set the pebble on the ground and slipped the shoe back on, not tying it yet. When they stood and tested their weight, the relief was immediate. The foot landed cleanly. The body responded right away, shoulders easing, breath deepening stride, returning to normal. The contrast was striking. They hadn't realized how much effort they'd been putting into compensating. Adjusting their walk, tensing their leg, holding their frustration in a tight, inefficient way. All because they hadn't wanted to stop. They tied the shoe properly this time and took a few steps back and forth under the light. No pain, no pressure. Just the simple, quiet act of walking. And that's when it clicked, not as a lesson, not as a speech, but as a plain recognition. They had been doing the same thing emotionally all day. The argument from earlier wasn't catastrophic. It wasn't unforgivable. It was just lodged. A small thing sitting in the wrong place, changing the way everything else felt. And instead of stopping to deal with it, they'd kept moving, kept adjusting, kept telling themselves it would pass, but it hadn't passed. It had rubbed. They started walking again, this time more slowly. The night felt different now, less hostile. The same streetlights, the same sidewalk. But without the constant irritation, everything softened. They thought about how often anger works like that pebble, not dramatic enough to demand attention, not painful enough to force action, just irritating enough to poison every step if you let it stay. They also thought about how easy it would have been to kick the shoe against the curb, to swear, to get mad at the night for being inconvenient. None of that would have removed the stone. Stopping had. They reached the end of the block and turned back toward home. The walk felt shorter now, lighter. The anger from earlier hadn't disappeared. It was still there, waiting to be addressed. But it no longer had a physical foothold. It wasn't riding every step. They realized something quietly. As they walked, sometimes letting go doesn't mean pretending you're fine. It means stopping long enough to take out the thing that's hurting you before you keep going. They didn't know yet what they would say about the argument or when, or if it even needed words. Those decisions could wait. For now it was enough to walk without wincing. The street light behind them buzzed softly as they moved on, leaving the small gray pebble where it belonged on the ground, not inside them. It didn't hurt at first. That was the problem. They were halfway down the block before they noticed it, a small sharp pressure under the ball of the foot. Not enough to stop walking, just enough to be annoying. The kind of discomfort you assume will disappear if you keep moving. They kept walking. Street lights cast pale circles on the sidewalk. A late bus sighed past on the main road. The night had that ordinary, unfinished feeling, quiet, but not asleep yet. They had gone out for a short walk to cool off after a long day. Nothing more. No destination, no plan. The pressure grew with each step, still manageable, still ignorable. But it changed their stride just enough to throw everything else off. Their shoulders tightened, their jaws set. They felt irritation rise out of proportion to something so small. Earlier there had been an argument, not loud, not explosive, just persistent. The kind that doesn't end with slammed doors, but with 1,000 unfinished sentences hanging in the air. They had walked away, telling themselves it wasn't worth it, telling themselves to drop it. Now the stone in the shoe seemed to take on extra meaning. Every step landed on it again and again and again. They told themselves to keep going. I'll deal with it later. That thought felt familiar. They reached the corner and turned, the pressure now unmistakable. A tiny rock probably wedged just right to cause maximum irritation without actually injuring anything. Their pace slowed. Their breathing shortened. Anger has a way of hitching a ride on physical discomfort. The body starts reacting before the mind catches up. By the time they stopped under a streetlight, they were more upset than the situation deserved. They bent down, lifted one foot, and shook it once. Nothing happened. The stone stayed put. They sighed sharper than they meant to and leaned against a metal signpost. The light buzzed faintly overhead. The sidewalk was empty. For a moment, they considered just pushing through. It's not that bad. That thought felt familiar too. Instead, they sat down on the curb. The concrete was cool through their clothes. They unlaced the shoe slowly, fingers moving with less urgency now that they'd stopped. When they tipped it upside down, a small pebble fell into their palm. Smooth, gray, ordinary. They stared at it longer than necessary. So much irritation for something this small. They set the pebble on the ground and slipped the shoe back on, not tying it yet. When they stood and tested their weight, the relief was immediate. The foot landed cleanly. The body responded right away, shoulders easing, breath deepening stride, returning to normal. The contrast was striking. They hadn't realized how much effort they'd been putting into compensating, adjusting their walk, tensing their leg, holding their frustration in a tight, inefficient way. All because they hadn't wanted to stop. They tied the shoe properly this time and took a few steps back and forth under the light. No pain, no pressure, just the simple, quiet act of walking. And that's when it clicked, not as a lesson, not as a speech, but as a plain recognition. They had been doing the same thing emotionally all day. The argument from earlier wasn't catastrophic. It wasn't unforgivable. It was just lodged. A small thing sitting in the wrong place, changing the way everything else felt. And instead of stopping to deal with it, they'd kept moving, kept adjusting, kept telling themselves it would pass, but it hadn't passed. It had rubbed. They started walking again, this time more slowly. The night felt different now, less hostile. The same streetlights, the same sidewalk. But without the constant irritation, everything softened. They thought about how often anger works like that pebble. Not dramatic enough to demand attention, not painful enough to force action. Just irritating enough to poison every step if you let it stay. They also thought about how easy it would have been to kick the shoe against the curb, to swear, to get mad at the night for being inconvenient. None of that would have removed the stone. Stopping had. They reached the end of the block and turned back toward home. The walk felt shorter now, lighter. The anger from earlier hadn't disappeared. It was still there, waiting to be addressed. But it no longer had a physical foothold. It wasn't riding every step. They realized something quietly as they walked. Sometimes letting go doesn't mean pretending you're fine. It means stopping long enough to take out the thing that's hurting you before you keep going. They didn't know yet what they would say about the argument, or when, or if it even needed words. Those decisions could wait. For now, it was enough to walk without wincing. The streetlight behind them buzzed softly as they moved on, leaving the small gray pebble where it belonged, on the ground, not inside them. They sat on the edge of the couch, with a notebook resting on their knees, the room lit only by a small lamp near the wall. Outside, the evening had settled in quietly, without any announcement. It had been one of those days. Nothing terrible had happened, nothing especially good either. But their mind felt crowded, like too many thoughts had been left open at the same time. They opened the notebook and stared at the blank page. Usually, when emotions showed up like this, they tried to push them away. Stay busy, scroll longer, distract harder. Tonight, none of that worked, so they stayed where they were. A thought rose first, sharp and impatient. I should be doing more. Then another followed close behind. I'm falling behind. Then a quieter one, harder to catch. Something is wrong with me. They recognized the pattern. Once one thought appeared, the others rushed in, each one pulling the next along with it like a small herd that refused to move in a straight line. They picked up the pen and wrote the first word that came to mind. Tired. They paused, surprised by how true it felt. Another feeling nudged forward, anxious. Then one more, lonely. The page began to fill slowly, not with explanations, but with names. They had learned something during their training about emotions, about the nervous system, about how feelings worked. But knowing didn't always make it easier to live with them. Tonight, though, a different image came to mind. A shepherd, not shouting, not chasing, just standing steady, watching the flock move, guiding it gently when it drifted too far. They looked at the list again. These weren't enemies. They were signals. Each emotion wanted something. Rest, reassurance, connection, none of them needed to be eliminated. They took a slow breath and placed a hand on their chest. For once, they didn't try to fix how they felt. They simply noticed it. The emotions shifted slightly, not disappearing but loosening their grip as if relieved to be seen. They wrote another word. Present. That one surprised them too. They leaned back against the couch, the notebook still open, and let their breathing find its own rhythm. Maybe leadership didn't mean control. Maybe it meant staying close enough not to abandon what was already here. The room felt calmer, even though the thoughts hadn't stopped completely. They were still there, but they weren't running the show. They closed the notebook and set it on the table, not because everything had been sorted out, but because that was enough for tonight. The lamp cast a soft circle of light across the room, leaving the rest in shadow. They noticed how different their body felt now. The tightness in their shoulders had eased. Their jaw wasn't clenched anymore. The emotions were still present, moving quietly in the background, but they no longer felt overwhelming. They had space to move without colliding. They thought again about the image of the shepherd. A shepherd didn't demand silence from the flock, didn't expect perfect order. The job wasn't to stop movement. It was to keep the group together and moving in the same general direction. They realized that leadership, when it came to their inner world, looked like this: staying awake, staying kind, setting gentle boundaries. When worry tried to run ahead, they noticed it and slowed their pace. When sadness lagged behind, they didn't leave it there. Nothing was pushed out. Nothing was shamed. They had spent years believing that emotional strength meant being unaffected, that calm meant the absence of feeling. Now they saw it differently. Calm was the ability to stay present while feelings moved through. They turned off the lamp and let the room grow darker. As they lay down, their thoughts drifted again, but without urgency. They didn't chase them. They didn't wrestle them. They trusted themselves to guide the night gently. Outside, the world continued as it always did. Inside, they rested in the quiet understanding that they were no longer being dragged by their emotions. They were walking with them. And that made all the difference. Some worries don't come from what we see. They come from how unclear the seeing has become. Late that night, the person stood in a small bathroom, the kind with soft yellow light and a mirror that had seen better days. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the ventilation fan. The sink held a few water spots. The mirror showed thin streaks where steam had dried unevenly. The person leaned closer, noticing their own reflection looked slightly dull. Not distorted, just muted, like something was between the eyes and the image. It had been one of those days where the mind kept questioning itself. Not loudly, just persistently. Did I misread that situation? Why do I feel unsure about something so small? What if I'm not seeing this clearly? The person reached for a hand towel hanging nearby and wiped a small section of the mirror. The cloth moved easily, leaving behind a clearer patch. The reflection there looked sharper, more precise. The contrast was noticeable. The rest of the mirror still looked hazy, but that clean spot stood out. Nothing about the person had changed, only the surface in front of them. Overthinking often works this way. The mind assumes confusion means something is wrong with what it's looking at. It forgets to check the lens. The person wiped another section of the mirror, then another. Each pass revealed more detail. The face looked the same, but the image felt more trustworthy, less questionable. There was a quiet satisfaction in that. Not because the reflection was important, but because clarity didn't require effortful thinking. It required a simple action. The person paused, towel resting against the sink. The thoughts from earlier still lingered, but they felt less urgent now, less personal. Maybe nothing was wrong with the situation. Maybe the view had just been clouded. The mirror wasn't broken. It was dusty. The person turned on the faucet, briefly rinsing the towel. The sound of water filled the room, steady and grounding. As the towel was wrung out, droplets fell into the sink, each one landing and disappearing without leaving a trace. That felt familiar too. The person returned to the mirror, wiping the remaining areas, slowly, not rushing. The strokes were uneven, imperfect, but effective. The image sharpened bit by bit. Overthinking tends to pile up quietly. A doubt here, a second guess there. Each one settles like dust, barely noticeable at first. Over time, the surface becomes less clear, and the mind assumes the blur is permanent. But dust isn't damage. The person stepped back and looked at the mirror again. It wasn't spotless. A few streaks remained. But it was clear enough. The reflection felt stable. The person studied their own eyes for a moment. Not critically, just observing. The face looked tired, but familiar. Real. The doubts from earlier returned briefly, testing the space. What if you're still missing something? The thought arrived, then softened. Even a clean mirror doesn't show everything at once. It shows what's in front of it. Nothing more. The person placed the towel back on the rack and turned off the light above the sink. The room dimmed slightly, shadows smoothing the edges of things. Clarity didn't mean certainty. It meant fewer distortions. The person leaned against the counter, letting the body rest. The mind felt quieter now. Not because the questions were answered, but because they no longer felt so close to the face. Distance helped. The mirror stood there, calm and neutral, ready to reflect whatever came next. It didn't judge. It didn't analyze. It simply showed what was there when it was allowed to be clean enough. And for now, that was sufficient. The bathroom felt quieter after the light was turned off. Only the small night light near the floor remained on, casting a soft glow across the tiles. The mirror reflected less now, but what it did show felt gentler, less exposed. The person stayed there for a moment, not checking their reflection again, just standing with hands resting on the counter. The surface was cool and solid, something real to lean on. The doubts from earlier in the day tried to return, but they came more slowly now. They didn't rush in all at once. They appeared one by one, like dust settling after the air has already begun to clear. What if I judged that wrong? What if I misunderstood someone's tone? What if I'm not as capable as I think? Each thought arrived, hovered, then passed without being pulled closer. The person noticed the difference. Earlier, these thoughts had felt right up against the face, demanding attention. Now they stayed at a distance. The mirror had helped with that, not by answering anything, but by changing how close the questions felt. Overthinking often presses the mind too close to the problem, so close that everything looks distorted. Small details feel huge. Uncertainty feels like failure. Stepping back doesn't remove the question. It restores proportion. The person turned slightly and caught a partial reflection in the mirror from the side. It wasn't sharp, but it was recognizable. Enough to know who was standing there. That seemed important. Clarity doesn't mean perfect visibility. It means not mistaking blur for truth. The person left the bathroom and walked down the hallway. The house was quiet now. Lights were low. The day had finally reached its end. In the bedroom, a lamp cast a warm circle onto the wall. The person sat on the edge of the bed and took off their shoes, slowly, one at a time. Each movement felt unhurried. The mind continued to offer thoughts, but they felt thinner, less convincing, like reflections seen through glass rather than direct experience. The person remembered how earlier the mirror had looked dull, almost unreliable. Nothing about the person had changed during that time, only the layer in between. So many worries work like that. They don't reflect reality as it is. They reflect it through layers of doubt, fatigue, memory, and habit. The mind forgets that the surface can be cleaned. The person lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Shadows from the lamp softened the corners of the room. The body felt heavier now, not from tension, but from tiredness. A final thought drifted through, quieter than the rest. Maybe I don't need to look so closely tonight. That thought didn't ask for agreement. It simply passed like a suggestion offered without pressure. The mirror in the bathroom would gather dust again. Steam would rise. Water spots would return. That was normal. Cleaning it once didn't mean it would stay clear forever. But knowing it could be cleaned changed something. The person closed their eyes, letting the day sit where it was. No need to recheck, no need to review. Some days require action. Some days require clarity. And some days only require not mistaking dust for damage. The room remained still. The thoughts grew softer, then fewer. And in that quiet, the mind rested, not because everything was resolved, but because the view no longer felt distorted. That was enough for tonight. Wherever you are tonight, I'm grateful you chose to spend this quiet time here. If these stories help you rest, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a gentle place to land. And now, you don't need to do anything more. Let the night hold what you can't carry. And if sleep comes, let it come.